Hero of the day, lover of my wife.
Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment my life began to spiral. Maybe it was when I first ignored the gnawing doubts creeping into my marriage, choosing instead to focus on work deadlines and mundane distractions. Or perhaps it was earlier, during those quiet evenings when we sat in the same room but lived in entirely different worlds, her eyes fixed on a laptop screen, mine glued to my phone. At the time, I told myself the distance was temporary, a natural ebb and flow of married life. I didn't realize that the small cracks in our relationship were already spreading. Still, if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have told you my life was ordinary, if not predictable. I had a steady job in software development, a cozy apartment, and a wife who was as passionate about her freelance work as she was about our shared love of travel. Sure, there were challenges, but nothing we couldn't handle. Or so I thought. It's strange how easily we fool ourselves into believing that stability is synonymous with security, that the things we hold dear are immune to the unexpected. I learned the hard way how wrong that assumption can be. My wife wasn't supposed to survive that day. Wait, hold on. Let me explain. I don't mean that I wished her dead or anything like that. It's just that her surviving the shooting complicated my life in ways I never expected. If I've learned anything from this ordeal, it's that people on the internet love twisting words. So let me be clear. I'm grateful she lived. But honestly, part of me wonders if things might have been easier if she hadn't. This whole experience has taught me something else too. It's better to say exactly what you mean, even if others will twist it. So yeah, her survival brought me more grief than I could have imagined. The shooting itself was an atrocity, something that should push society to take meaningful action. Yet, as usual, nothing significant changed. I won't mention the shooter's name. He doesn't deserve that recognition. The last thing society needs is to give attention to violent individuals craving notoriety. Whether he acted out of hatred, delusion, or sheer malice doesn't matter. 6 people lost their lives, 9 were hospitalized, and countless others had their lives shattered, including me and my wife. A child lost their mother, and a father watched his son die. These are the real tragedies, not the motivations of some maniac. In today's media frenzy, the story could have easily faded into obscurity. But people dug deeper and found something to latch onto: the destruction of my marriage. That day started like any other. I was stuck in an endless software development meeting where nothing productive happened. Ray, a colleague, spent most of it scrolling through his phone. At one point, he nudged me and whispered, "Bill, there's been a shooting downtown." At first, I shrugged it off, tragic but distant. Then he showed me a video. In it, a man and a woman stood within a police cordon, clutching each other. The man was large and muscular, vaguely familiar, while the blonde woman, my stomach dropped. It was Tracy, my wife of 4 years. The clip replayed. I saw her stiffen, push the man away, and glance around awkwardly. There was no kiss, but her body language, and his, left little doubt about what had been going on. She wasn't just comforting a stranger. There was history between them. "Send me the link," I muttered. Ray hesitated, but I didn't care. I stood up and left the meeting, ignoring the pitying glances of my coworkers. Words like wife and affair lingered in the air as I exited. In the parking lot, I searched for details on the shooting. Tracy hadn't called, nor had the police, which meant she wasn't physically hurt. Still, I was shaking as I drove, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. My wife had nearly died in a shooting, and yet, all I could think about was her betrayal. For 6 years, I loved her, through good times and bad. Even if our marriage was crumbling, even if she cheated on me, I never wanted her dead. But as I drove toward the aftermath of a tragedy that changed everything, I couldn't ignore the bitter reality. This wasn't just about a shooting. It was about the unraveling of my life. I didn't need GPS anymore once I was within a mile of the mall. The flashing lights of police cars, buzzing news helicopters, and the crowd of onlookers made the scene impossible to miss. I parked a few blocks away and pushed my way through the crowd toward the barricades. A cop barked at me to back off, but I called out, "My wife is in there." Over his shoulder, I spotted Tracy sitting on the edge of an ambulance. Wrapped in a blanket, she clutched a paper cup and stared blankly ahead. I yelled her name repeatedly until she finally turned. Her reaction was immediate. She dropped the blanket and cup, leaped over the barricade, and threw herself into my arms. I held her tightly as she sobbed uncontrollably, completely ignoring the officer who looked ready to intervene. That's when I saw him. Standing by the cops, the guy was tall, ridiculously good-looking, and oozed confidence, like someone cast as a superhero in a blockbuster. When Tracy ran to me, he followed at first, then stopped, watching with a smug grin before turning back toward the police. I didn't need to know more to feel the pit in my stomach deepen. I already knew this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. A paramedic approached, attempting to persuade Tracy to return to the ambulance for observation. She clung to me, trembling and refusing to cooperate. While the paramedic explained that it was standard protocol to monitor anyone in shock, he admitted that she didn't appear physically injured. Tracy's weary eyes, filled with desperation, silently begged for support. She was clearly terrified and emotionally overwhelmed, and her grip on me only tightened. The paramedic hesitated, clearly torn between following procedure and respecting her obvious distress. Recognizing her fragile state, I calmly intervened, convincing him that forcing her to go would only heighten her trauma. Reluctantly, he agreed, provided me with paperwork detailing what symptoms to watch for, and stepped aside. After a brief check by the police to confirm my contact information, we were finally allowed to leave. As we made our way to the car, we had to navigate past a local TV crew pushing for comments. Brushing them off, we slipped through the chaos and headed for the safety of home. The drive home was silent. Tracy stared out the window, lost in thought, and flinched violently when we hit a pothole. Once we got home, I carried her inside and put her in a warm shower. She wasn't seriously hurt, just a few scrapes and cuts the paramedics had treated, but her clothes were dirty, and I hoped the water would help soothe her. As I helped her undress, her matching bra and underwear made me pause. Tracy never bothered with coordinated lingerie unless she had plans, special plans. The thought added another piece to the growing pile of suspicion. I said nothing. Confronting her now, when she was barely holding it together, wouldn't help. I followed all the advice the EMT had given, keeping her away from the news and electronics, speaking gently, and making her as comfortable as possible. But my mind wouldn't let go of the obvious truth. She's cheating on you. Why are you even doing this for her? The answer came quietly but firmly, because she's a human being in pain. Whatever was happening in our marriage, I couldn't ignore her suffering. That night, I lay beside her, unable to sleep. Tracy woke up screaming more than once, and I held her, whispering reassurances that I wasn't even sure I believed. She clung to me, desperate for comfort, while my thoughts circled the truth. She was lying to me almost certainly, but I couldn't deny her humanity or my own. Late at night, between Tracy's screams and restless sleep, I started researching divorce laws in our state. I didn't want to rush into anything, but I felt I needed to be prepared. We had no kids, rented an apartment, and had been married for only 4 years. Untangling our lives wouldn't be hard on paper, but in reality, the situation was anything but simple, especially with the world watching. The flood of messages started before I even reached the crime scene and didn't stop until I turned off my phone. By the next morning, hundreds of notifications had piled up across every platform: texts, Facebook, Messenger, Twitter, Discord, and more. Most of them were links to that damn video. Concerned acquaintances, old friends, and complete strangers all reached out, many offering empty encouragement like hang in there. A few were more aggressive, spewing anger toward Tracy. Others, particularly from her friends and family, urged me not to jump to conclusions. From these messages, I learned about Chad Wilkerson, the man in the video with my wife. Chad had been Tracy's high school boyfriend, a short-lived romance that never became serious. But now he was back in her life, and his presence was impossible to ignore. Chad was everything I wasn't: confident, successful, and with a heroic streak that the world couldn't get enough of. During the shooting, he had confronted the attacker, disarmed him, and taken him down. Even I couldn't deny that he'd saved lives, including Tracy's. When Tracy finally woke up around 9 a.m., more footage from the shooting had surfaced, including the restaurant's security camera recording. I didn't want to watch it, but it was unavoidable. The video showed the chaos of the attack and Chad's bravery. He had acted without hesitation, protecting everyone in the restaurant, including my wife. Tracy, meanwhile, moved through the house like a ghost, clearly traumatized. I called to arrange counseling for her, but the earliest appointment was a week away. In the meantime, the phone calls were relentless. Friends, family, reporters, calling her phone, my phone, and even the landline. I tried to shield her from it all, keeping her away from the internet and television, but it was impossible to manage everything. Eventually, Tracy opened her laptop, intending to catch up on her usual reading. It didn't take long for her to stumble upon the viral video of the kiss. When I found her, She was sobbing at her desk, watching the clip replay over and over. The footage was edited to focus on the kiss, omitting the moment she pushed Chad away. Details about their past relationship had been posted on a local Facebook page, adding fuel to the fire. When she saw me, her voice cracked. "I didn't cheat on you," she said over and over, as if trying to convince both of us. "I know it looks bad, but I didn't, I promise." She explained how Chad had contacted her months earlier about expanding his business into our city. He needed help with advertising and design, and he'd thought of her. Listening to her, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. The video, the messages, Chad's heroism, it all seemed to overshadow the truth. And as she pleaded for me to believe her, I realized that no matter what had happened, the damage to our marriage had already begun. Tracy was a freelance graphic designer, and not just any designer. She was highly sought after. Her home office, which we'd both shared during the darkest days of the pandemic, had been the heart of her work. Our marriage began in those turbulent times, just before the world shut down, in March 2020. We married in October 2019, barely 6 months before everything changed. I knew how talented and hardworking Tracy was, and I admired her for it. During nearly 3 years of remote work, I saw her dedication up close. Even when I returned to the office after the pandemic, it was clear she thrived in her element. But then, my company underwent a leadership shakeup, and despite strong productivity metrics, management forced everyone back to the office. It marked a turning point, not just for me, but for us. When I confronted Tracy about Chad, she hesitated before admitting the truth. She explained that Chad had reconnected with her a year earlier. At first, it seemed innocent, just an acquaintance from her past, someone she barely considered an ex. They had dated briefly in high school, and she hadn't thought much of it when they became Facebook friends. It wasn't until months later that he reached out to discuss a business opportunity, asking for her help with graphic design and advertising for his company's expansion. As she spoke, I could sense her fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what was happening between us. Tracy had always relied on me to be her rock, her steady support through her moments of artistic restlessness. But now, she saw cracks forming in the foundation she'd leaned on for years. She reluctantly admitted that things with Chad had gone further than they should have. She insisted the kiss captured in the video was their first since high school, and their last. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "But nothing else happened. I wasn't going to let it." When I pressed her about not telling me she'd reconnected with Chad, she struggled to explain. She claimed he had started as a client who became a friend, and she hadn't thought of him as an ex-boyfriend. "It wasn't like that," she said. But the growing closeness between them had blurred lines she should never have crossed. I couldn't help but bring up her choice of lingerie, the coordinated set she never wore unless it was for a special occasion. Her answer felt rehearsed. It wasn't for him, it was for me. It made me feel good. She avoided my gaze, but I could see the guilt in her face. Tracy reminded me of how things used to be when we both worked from home. In those early days, we were inseparable, newlyweds, building a life together, spending every waking hour in the same space. "We used to have fun," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. And it was true. I remembered the excitement, the way we made time for each other, even amid deadlines and stress. But things had changed when I returned to the office. We tried to hold on to that closeness, planning special nights and texting throughout the day. At first it worked. We missed each other and made up for lost time whenever I came home. But gradually, the effort faded. I adjusted to the new normal, but Tracy hadn't. She felt the distance more acutely than I realized, and apparently Chad had filled the gap I'd unknowingly left. Now, as I sat across from her, the weight of everything hung between us. Tracy was apologetic, insistent that she hadn't intended to betray me, but her actions, intentional or not, had already done damage. And while I could see the pain in her eyes, I couldn't ignore the cracks spreading in the foundation of our marriage. The smile on my face faded as the weight of realization replaced the fleeting memory of better times. Tracy mirrored my expression, her frown deepening as she hesitated, then continued. She spoke about her loneliness, the isolation of working from home while I returned to the office. The pandemic had kept us close at first, sharing meals and laughter, but as life shifted, so had we. She confessed that she missed me, my presence during lunch breaks, the small routines we once shared. Her voice cracked as she admitted that my long days at work left her feeling abandoned. The sharpness in my tone interrupted her. I pointed out the privilege of working from home. the freedom to take a break when needed. She flinched, guilt flashing across her face before she insisted, almost desperately, that nothing happened with Chad. She repeated that it wasn't an affair, that he kissed her, not the other way around. She had pushed him away, caught in the heat of the moment, shaken by the near-death experience they'd just endured. But as she faltered mid-sentence, her expression revealed more than her words could. I finished the thought she couldn't bring herself to voice. "He's the real man, isn't he?" My tone was cold, and though she denied it, her face betrayed her inner turmoil. She admitted, finally, that she had allowed things to escalate emotionally, even if not physically. She called it a mistake, one born of vulnerability and bad judgment. Tears welled in her eyes as she apologized, her voice breaking with shame. I didn't move as she reached out for me. My voice was flat, almost detached as I painted the picture of what could have been. If she had died that day, I would have been left piecing together her secrets from her belongings, her phone, and the messages that would tell a story I wasn't prepared to hear. What would I have thought of the texts and emails exchanged with Chad? Would they look innocent to a grieving husband? Would I have believed her fidelity if I hadn't been able to ask? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered but deeply understood. Tracy's tears fell freely now, her voice trembling with apology after apology. She admitted that the text had crossed a line, that the emotional connection with Chad had gone further than she ever should have allowed. I asked the question that weighed heavier than any other. Would she have regretted it if she hadn't been caught? Her sobs were her answer. I pulled her close, holding her as her body shook with grief and regret. My own pain was a quieter ache, but no less deep. I could feel her warmth, the physical closeness that once brought comfort, but the trust between us felt irreparably fractured. I wanted to believe her promises that it would never happen again, but I couldn't ignore the truth. This emotional betrayal would have become something more if tragedy hadn't intervened. The rest of the day was a quiet truce. We turned off our phones and computers, staying away from the outside world. The television stayed on lighthearted comedies and romance. No action, no horror, no drama. The heaviness of reality made those genres unbearable now. We ordered takeout, tipping the delivery driver generously for navigating through the news crews that had begun circling. The next morning, as we tried to settle into something resembling normalcy, the world reminded us that it wasn't ready to let go. A well-dressed reporter knocked at the door seeking a statement. They were met with a firm, "No comment," as Tracy made breakfast in the kitchen and I brewed coffee. We thought we could begin moving forward, but the storm that had been unleashed wasn't finished with us yet. I opened my laptop to find the story had spiraled far beyond the initial tragedy, morphing into a sensationalized spectacle. What began as coverage of a deranged shooter had been transformed into a narrative barely recognizable from the truth. The internet, as always, refused to rest. In just 2 days, the story evolved and twisted repeatedly. Local news outlets initially covered the shooting, pushing it to national networks. Ordinarily, such stories fade into the background of collective tragedy, but this time, things took a different turn. The footage of Chad kissing Tracy, heavily edited to exclude her pushing him away, became the center of attention on social media. By the time the networks aired it, it had already been transformed into a tale of forbidden passion. Within 24 hours, the term Love Islands was trending. People latched onto the idea of a tragic romance born amid chaos, comparing it to the viral story of a couple who met during a Las Vegas concert shooting. But unlike that couple, Tracy was married, and Chad wasn't some anonymous figure. He was a well-known businessman with an eager PR team. Chad quickly became a media darling. Within days, he was branded an American hero, celebrated as the brave man who stopped a madman and saved countless lives. His story hit all the right notes to become a legend. On Fox News, when asked about Tracy, he delivered a smug, "A gentleman doesn't kiss and tell," ensuring the audience's adoration. The internet followed suit, dubbing him Chipotle Chad and flooding social media with memes of him as a rugged, stoic icon. Meanwhile, Tracy and I retreated into isolation, trying to wait out the storm. We stayed offline and avoided the news, knowing that internet fame was more curse than blessing, but it didn't stop there. Trolls dug up Tracy's personal information, her workplace, address, social media accounts, and phone number. They harassed her friends, family, and colleagues, ensuring no corner of her life was left untouched. Then came the memes targeting Tracy. The professional trolls, discovering she was married, branded her two-faced Tracy. One viral image showed her sitting at a table, gazing at a man on one side while I appeared distracted by my phone on the other. The truth, That the man was her gay cousin and I was checking for updates on my injured father didn't matter. All that mattered was the narrative of a wife ignoring her husband for another man. 4 days after the shooting, the mob turned its attention to me. The first insult, calling me an a-hole on Twitter, was the start of a tidal wave. A meme portraying me as Chuck the a-hole soon followed, painting me as the clueless husband oblivious to his wife's supposed infidelity. The truth was irrelevant. The internet had already decided who we were. Not 24 hours after Tracy's doxing, the focus shifted back to Chad. New memes emerged, blending mockery with his hero status. One particularly popular one read, "Beats your wife, saves her life." For Tracy and me, the fallout from the shooting was no longer just about survival. It was about enduring a public spectacle we never asked for, one that continued to unravel our lives long after the initial tragedy. Chad's PR team worked wonders, turning the scandal into a profitable spectacle. The narrative of a jock stealing a nerd's wife proved irresistible. Tracy, beautiful and now infamous, became the internet's new obsession. I'd always felt lucky to be with her, but now the online world confirmed my insecurities with brutal enthusiasm. A fresh wave of fans, largely women craving a dramatic love triangle, fueled the frenzy. Fan fiction emerged, pitting Team Chad against the laughably small Team Bill. Tracy and I, struggling to reconnect, found ourselves unable to escape the narrative the internet had created. Every attempt to repair our relationship was overshadowed by the endless commentary and speculation online. Our troubles weren't confined to the digital world. Seeking therapy proved futile as our newfound notoriety seeped into those sessions. Therapists turned us away, unwilling to take on the baggage of our infamy, until we found one who agreed to help. Yet, even there, I felt attacked, subtly blamed for our problems while Tracy's actions were minimized. When Tracy began defending me against the counselor's hostility, it became clear something was wrong. Curiosity led me to the therapist's Facebook page, where I discovered her allegiance to Team Chad. We were nothing more than characters in her favorite soap opera. After that, we stopped seeking outside help. Meanwhile, Tracy's graphic design business surged. Though many inquiries were scams, legitimate offers came pouring in. She hired a virtual assistant to manage the chaos, turning her internet fame into a lucrative opportunity. But fame came with a dark side. Stalkers and trolls targeted her, reducing her to a caricature. Two-Faced Tracy. Memes spread like wildfire, cementing her as the poster child for infidelity. At work, my life was hell. My office was plastered with mocking memes, and no one took responsibility. Even HR offered no recourse. One of their own had been photographed, adding to the pile. Attempts to address the harassment were futile. In our at-will state, fighting back meant risking my job with no guarantee of justice. The ridicule followed me everywhere. Lunch breaks, sick days, even mundane errands were opportunities for more memes to appear. Each day, I returned home drained, and Tracy's attempts to console me only deepened my resentment. Her face, mocked and captioned, was a daily reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Tracy's nightmares worsened, robbing us both of sleep. While I tried to be supportive, my exhaustion left me cold. Her burgeoning career and social interactions eased her loneliness, but widened the gulf between us. She thrived in the chaos, while I sank deeper into isolation. The internet eventually moved on, but not completely. Our memes persisted, stripped of their original context, but still widely shared. Tracy remained a symbol of infidelity, and I was Chuck the pathetic simp. The stigma followed me, sabotaging job interviews and branding me as a liability. Employers saw hiring me as a risk, and even those who met with me seemed more interested in a selfie than my qualifications. Our relationship began unraveling. While Tracy grew busier and more connected, I became lonelier and more withdrawn. The dynamic between us had flipped. She had new opportunities, and I was stuck in a life defined by ridicule. The distance between us grew until it felt insurmountable. Even if the events that finally ended our marriage hadn't occurred, I'm not sure we could have survived. The internet had reduced our lives to a story, and we were left picking up the pieces of a relationship neither of us could fully mend. The first blow should have been predictable. A group of young men from a neighboring school decided it would be hilarious to harass me as I walked in and out of my office building. Their juvenile antics escalated over the weeks, going from mocking taunts to recording me for their TikTok accounts. I ignored them, assuming their interest would fade. Then one morning, their insults turned physical. Rocks were thrown, and one struck my cheek, leaving it bleeding. Furious, I turned on them and shouted, which sent them running. I patched myself up, figuring that was the end of it. I considered calling the police, but decided against it. I had deadlines to meet, and it didn't seem worth the effort. By lunchtime, videos of my outburst had gone viral under the tag Chuck Watt attacks people. By mid-afternoon, I was summoned to a meeting with my boss, his superior, and HR. Despite explaining what had happened, they deemed me a liability and terminated my employment. They offered a severance package, 3 months' pay, accrued vacation, and sick leave, and a glowing recommendation if I signed an NDA. My attorney advised me to take the deal. Losing my job might have been manageable if it hadn't also unleashed a fresh wave of online ridicule. For a few days, the internet branded me the bad guy before moving on to its next target, but the damage was done. Locally, I was now seen as a violent lunatic, and the already grim job market became even more inaccessible. The fallout spilled into my home life. Tracy and I had grown increasingly distant, and my constant presence only made things worse. What used to be enjoyable, spending time together in our apartment, became a source of tension. My frustrations with unemployment, coupled with her focus on her flourishing freelance career, created a growing divide. Tracy tried to support me, but her success only deepened my resentment, not because of her achievements, but because of how starkly they contrasted with my struggles. Our fights became routine, our affection dwindled, and our marriage began unraveling. I slept on the couch most nights, both of us too weary of each other to pretend otherwise. Our conversations avoided the deeper issues, but the silence between us said everything. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, each absorbed in our screens, a knock came at the door. I answered to find an entire SWAT team outside, their expressions tense and tools ready. The lead officer addressed me cautiously, confirming my name. When Tracy appeared behind me, they asked her the same. The officer explained that they'd received a report of a hostage situation at our address. Someone claiming to be a neighbor had called emergency, alleging I'd murdered our non-existent children and was holding Tracy hostage. It was a complete fabrication, likely the work of someone who thought it would be entertaining, or worse, someone who genuinely wanted me dead. Fortunately, the SWAT team had used a fiber optic camera to assess the situation before forcing entry. They found nothing but 2 people watching TV in the living room, preventing what could have been a dangerous escalation. Others in similar situations hadn't been so lucky. The motivations behind the swatting were impossible to fully comprehend. Maybe it was a troll from the endless stream of online spectators obsessed with the fabricated love triangle. Perhaps it was someone trying to eliminate me to further the narrative of Tracy and Chad. Whatever the reason, it was clear that this chaos was just another twisted turn in a saga we never wanted to be part of. The argument began almost as soon as the police left, their departure doing little to ease the tension in the room. Tracy sank onto the couch, her body slumped, as though the weight of the past weeks had finally become unbearable. She seemed on the verge of collapse, overwhelmed by frustration and regret. For my part, the adrenaline of the SWAT encounter had been replaced by simmering anger. I couldn't shake the memory of what had led us to this point, and my emotions spilled over. The blame between us surged back and forth like a tide, each accusation dredging up every unresolved grievance. Tracy was defensive, insistent that the chaos wasn't entirely her fault, but her reasoning only deepened my frustration. I couldn't hold back any longer. Everything that had been bottled up, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, came pouring out. I laid it all at her feet, blaming her for the choices that had unraveled our lives. Tracy pushed back, reminding me of the near-death experience she'd endured, as if it erased the events leading up to that moment. To me, it didn't. It felt like every decision she'd made had led to that chaos, and now I was caught in the wreckage. Finally, the tension boiled over, and I said the words I had held back for too long. I wanted a divorce. The moment the words left my mouth, a kind of awful clarity settled in the room. Tracy's anger gave way to fear, fear of what had become of us, fear of what was next. It wasn't fear of the SWAT team or the crazed world outside, but of the disintegration of the life we had built together. The rest of the night was a storm of emotions. We argued until we were too drained to continue. Tears flowed freely, and in the end, we collapsed into an uneasy silence. Despite everything, we clung to each other on the couch, as if holding on to a connection neither of us truly believed still existed. Tracy begged me to reconsider, but deep down, I knew the decision was final. I didn't hate her. In truth, I still loved her. That was the cruelest part. Love hadn't been enough to save us from what had happened, and it couldn't undo the damage we had both endured. None of what followed her ill-fated lunch with Chad, The memes, the harassment, the SWAT team was entirely her fault, but her choices had set the avalanche in motion. The next day, we broke our lease. The apartment complex was more than willing to waive the fees if it meant we would quietly leave. Over the following week, we packed our belongings, divided our lives, and signed the necessary paperwork to go our separate ways. Tracy tried every possible way to bridge the gap between us, but none of her efforts could undo what had been done. By the time we handed over the keys and prepared to leave, she finally seemed to accept that it was over. Before we went our separate ways, she turned to me, tears in her eyes, and expressed her regret. Her sorrow was palpable, but so was her resignation. I kissed her forehead, a quiet goodbye, and drove away without looking back. Nearly 3 years passed before our paths crossed again. The first thing I noticed wasn't her face, but her voice, sharp with irritation as she argued with an airline employee. I recognized it immediately, even before I could see her. From a distance, she looked both familiar and unfamiliar, her posture tense, her frame slightly fuller but still unmistakably hers. She was at the counter, her frustration evident as she demanded answers about a canceled flight. The employee, clearly overwhelmed, explained the situation as calmly as possible, but Tracy's agitation only grew. I stayed where I was, unsure whether to approach or remain an unseen observer. Watching her from afar, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and detachment, unsure of what I wanted or how I felt about seeing her again. The woman turning away from the counter in frustration looked strikingly different from the Tracy I once knew. Her shoulder-length black hair with bangs had replaced the long blonde waves she used to wear, and her glasses were now gone, replaced by contact lenses. She was dressed in a sensible business suit and skirt, a stark contrast to the bohemian, boutique-style outfit she had worn during our marriage. Yet as much as she seemed like a different person, I knew immediately it was her. She hadn't noticed me yet, or perhaps she had, but didn't recognize me. After all, I had changed too. I stepped out of the line and followed her as she hurried through the terminal. When she stopped, I gently tapped her shoulder. She turned sharply, startled, before her expression shifted to shock as recognition dawned. She whispered my name, and for a moment, it felt as if time had rewound. We exchanged pleasantries, both visibly surprised by how much the other had changed. She introduced herself as Elizabeth now, and though I smiled at the choice of her middle name, I couldn't help but notice how different she looked, yet how much she still felt the same. Her familiar laughter broke through as we chatted, teasing me about my beard and lack of glasses. The years apart had created an unexpected warmth between us, but it carried the weight of all we had left unsaid. We spoke about our current lives. Both of us, coincidentally, lived in Dallas now, and we were stuck in Houston because of a canceled flight. She suggested renting a car and splitting the drive, her company footing the bill. I hesitated for a moment, torn between curiosity and caution. But before I could overthink it, she had already agreed, her enthusiasm catching me off guard. We hurried to the rental desk, racing to beat the rush of stranded travelers. She secured a corporate SUV, something fancier than I would have chosen, but her card made it a non-issue. The familiarity of her sarcastic smile as she asked who would drive first hit me with a pang of nostalgia, but I brushed it aside. I volunteered for the first leg of the trip, wanting to put her at ease. The drive started in tense, chaotic Houston traffic, with little conversation beyond the occasional warning or shared frustration at reckless drivers. But as we left the city and settled into the rhythm of the highway, the silence grew companionable. As I drove, I stole glances at her. The conservative suit was a stark departure from the Tracy I remembered, but subtle traces of her former self lingered. Her pierced ears, the hippie-style glasses tucked into her bag, the bold black hair color. These hints of familiarity stirred something in me, but then I noticed a simple bracelet on her left ring finger, where a wedding band might have been. My heart sank. Of course, she had moved on. I had no claim to her anymore, and it shouldn't have surprised me. Still, the realization stung. I turned my focus back to the road, determined not to dwell on it. She broke the silence, asking what was on my mind. I hesitated, then admitted how strange it was to see her so changed, yet still so familiar. She lowered her gaze, her expression softening as she twirled a strand of hair nervously, a gesture that brought back memories I hadn't expected. In that moment, flashes of our life together came rushing back. The shy woman I'd met at a bar, nervously brushing her hair as I asked for her number, The hopeful fiancé dreaming of starting her own business, the frustrated partner at the breaking point of our marriage. Each memory painted a picture of a person I had loved deeply, someone who now felt both close and impossibly far away. As the miles passed, I couldn't help but wonder how much of Tracy, of Elizabeth, remained the same and how much had changed forever. The woman smiled softly, her gaze dropping in embarrassment. She explained how much her life had changed after everything fell apart. Initially, the fleeting fame had brought her more business than she could handle, but it didn't last. As the hype died down, her reputation as two-faced Tracy lingered. New clients stopped reaching out, and old ones questioned her integrity, accusing her of dishonesty. Eventually, the pressure became too much, and she gave up her business entirely. She admitted to going back to corporate work, though her first job didn't last long. Fighting back tears, she described the toxic environment. Cruel jokes, whispered gossip, and male colleagues assuming she was easy prey. It had become unbearable. After just a few months, she quit, taking some time to reinvent herself. The woman I now knew as Elizabeth, clad in her professional attire and carrying herself with quiet resolve, had emerged from that chapter of her life. Her voice trembled as she apologized again, this time for everything that had happened between us. She admitted she hadn't realized how hard things had been for me until she faced similar treatment. I assured her she wasn't alone in her regrets, but we both knew the damage was done. As we drove, I watched the flat Texas landscape blur past the window, avoiding the weight of her words. Eventually, I asked if she was happy now. Her initial confusion gave way to an almost startled expression as she slipped the simple ring off her finger. She explained that it wasn't a wedding band, but a shield, something she wore while traveling to avoid unwanted attention. She hadn't been dating. It simply hadn't been a priority. Her revelation left me momentarily speechless, but I refocused as she asked about my own life. I shared how I had tried to rebuild after losing everything. Finding steady employment had been impossible, so I turned to freelancing using platforms like Upwork and Fiverr. By using my full legal name, changing my appearance, and working remotely, I managed to remain anonymous. If anyone recognized me, they never mentioned it. I laughed lightly as I described how the gym had become a new refuge. With my old at-home routines unavailable, I started working out in public, finding solace in the anonymity of exercise. Over time, I got in shape, not to measure up to anyone like Chad, but for myself. I admitted, however, that I had once wondered if my appearance had played a role in what happened between us. Her response was immediate and firm, cutting through my doubts. She reminded me that I had been a good man who loved her and that the failure of our marriage wasn't my fault. She took full responsibility for letting herself be drawn into a situation where she was vulnerable to Chad's attention. The resentment in her voice was clearly directed inward, and it was painful to hear her speak so harshly of herself. I thanked her quietly, then continued explaining how my life had unfolded. I mentioned my mother's battle with cancer, which brought me back to Dallas to be closer to her. Thankfully, her cancer was now in remission, and I'd stayed in the city for the lower cost of living and a fresh start. Elizabeth looked at me with concern and genuine regret when I mentioned my mom's illness. She lamented that she hadn't known, wondering aloud if there was anything she could have done. I reassured her that my mother had always cared about her, even after everything. The hopefulness in her voice, as she asked if that was true, tugged at something in me. I understood that isolation and regret could make you crave connection, even in unexpected places. I met her gaze and assured her, yes, really, hoping it would offer her some small sense of comfort. The dashboard chimed softly, a small indicator light flashing to signal it was time to refuel. Spotting a gas station at the next exit, I pulled off the highway. As I filled the tank, Liz stepped out of the car, mentioning she'd grab snacks and use the restroom. 10 minutes later, we were back on the road, with Liz now behind the wheel. I rummaged through the plastic bag she brought, pulling out water bottles for us both, her predictable Chex Mix and a moon pie for me. She glanced over, noticing my reaction, and frowned. Oh no, I forgot you're eating healthier these days. Sorry, it didn't even cross my mind. The wrapper was gone in seconds, and I took a bite, savoring the nostalgia. I let out a satisfied groan, telling her it had been years since I'd last had one. Liz laughed, relieved. She remembered how much I loved them on road trips, and I admitted that the treat still held up, though road trips had been scarce for me lately. She gave me a sidelong look, surprised. Really? You're looking better than ever. What, no admirers to share these trips with? I shrugged off the compliment with a joke, But it didn't completely hide the awkwardness of the conversation. We reminisced briefly about some of the absurdities we'd both encountered, the strange assumptions and bold advances from people who recognized us, or thought they did. Liz shared one particularly ridiculous encounter, and I shook my head at the audacity of it all. For a while, we drove in silence, snacking and sipping water as the road stretched out before us. Nearing Dallas, Liz suddenly giggled softly, breaking the quiet. When I asked why, she reminded me of our first trip together, back when she was meeting my family. The memory made me blush, and she laughed even harder, clearly enjoying my reaction. It was a good memory, one we both cherished, but the laughter quickly faded into a quieter, more reflective mood. We both knew those times felt like a lifetime ago. Liz stared ahead at the road, her voice soft when she finally replied, "Yeah, we had some great times." The car was quiet again until I broke the silence. I needed to say something, something I felt she needed to hear. "Liz," I began, my voice steady but low. "I'm sorry, too." Her eyes darted toward me briefly before returning to the road. "For what?" she asked, her tone genuinely puzzled. "For not being stronger," I admitted. "For not being able to handle everything we went through together. I should have been there for you, no matter what. I wasn't, and I regret that." Liz frowned, but didn't look at me. Her voice carried a mix of anger and sadness. "I cheated on you, or I almost did, and I was a horrible person to you." I agreed with a touch of humor to lighten the moment, earning a snort from her. "Yeah, I know, but still, I mean it. I'm sorry." She nodded, then paused, her voice quieter now. "You don't owe me an apology, though. I messed everything up. My life, your life, ours. It was all my fault." I interrupted her softly. "And yet you still saved people's lives." She turned sharply, confusion clear on her face. "What? You didn't intend to, but you did. Everything that happened, the chaos, the memes, the SWAT teams, it was awful. But you also did something good. You were part of something that saved those people in that restaurant. Chad wouldn't have been there if it weren't for you. He wouldn't have stopped that shooter. Those lives wouldn't have been spared." Liz started to protest, but I pressed on, my voice steady. "I've had years to think about this. Freelancing, working out, changing my name, my mom's cancer. I've reflected on all of it. And I've realized that even in the worst of times, good things can come from bad. Not by some cosmic plan, but by the choices we make. You made some bad choices, but you also made a difference." She stared at me, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotions. I could see the guilt and gratitude warring within her. "I never thought of it that way," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car. We drove on, the silence now filled with a sense of understanding. The road stretched ahead, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were no longer weighed down by the past. Elizabeth sat in silence, her breathing steady but her focus clearly on my words. Though her eyes remained on the road, I could sense that every part of her attention was absorbed in what I was saying. I reflected aloud on how events often seem devoid of any greater purpose. If there were some higher plan, I reasoned, those who had died that day might still be alive, and the shooter might have received help long before his violence. But as it stood, the tragedy played out as it did. And because of those circumstances, dozens of people were able to walk out of that restaurant alive and return to their families, an outcome that might never have occurred otherwise. I noted how Chad's brief moment of fame had eventually crumbled under the weight of his own mistakes. His PR team had been stellar, but his legal counsel was less so. When a restaurant sued over unauthorized use of its name in his advertising, it sparked litigation that led to a deeper investigation. Discovery revealed troubling evidence, things Chad either hadn't considered or hadn't been able to scrub from his digital history. The carefully constructed image of the heroic American ideal unraveled, exposing the truth. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably, visibly pained by the memory of her attraction to Chad. She admitted it was a hard truth to reconcile, but acknowledged that his charm was part of a well-practiced pattern. While she regretted being drawn into his orbit, she was also relieved she hadn't faced worse consequences. Chad's behavior might have continued unchecked had the events of that day not occurred, and his downfall was one small, bittersweet consolation. I considered her words carefully. The fallout from that day, memes, harassment, the strain on our lives had been brutal, but the reality was undeniable. Lives had been saved, and Chad, once untouchable, was now held accountable for his actions. The personal cost had been immense, but the collective benefit could not be ignored. Elizabeth nodded, steering the car through the maze of Dallas highways as we approached our next turn. The drive was steady, but the weight of the conversation lingered. I picked up where I left off, reflecting on how my life had shifted after everything fell apart. Losing my job and our marriage had been devastating, but it forced me into a new chapter. Freelancing had given me the flexibility to care for my mom when she became ill and the freedom to rebuild my life on my terms. I had started exercising, regained confidence, and carved out a new routine. It wasn't the path I had envisioned, but it had brought unexpected growth. Elizabeth listened intently, her expression tight with emotion. She seemed genuinely happy that I had found some semblance of peace, but her own struggles were evident. She admitted that she had been trying to focus on the positives in her life, but often found herself falling short. The weight of her guilt was palpable, and she spoke of her regrets. What she had done to me, to us, and to herself. Her voice cracked under the strain of self-recrimination, and the years of carrying that burden were painfully clear. I couldn't let her spiral further. The moment felt right, and I said what I knew she needed to hear. I forgave her. The impact of those words was immediate. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes darting to me in disbelief. She pressed for confirmation, and I repeated my forgiveness with conviction. The tension in her posture softened, and a quiet, heartfelt "thank you" escaped her lips. As we continued north, the air in the car felt lighter, though silence prevailed. It wasn't awkward, but filled with a mutual understanding that we were both processing everything that had been said. Eventually, I broke the quiet by mentioning how much I liked her new hairstyle, a light-hearted comment meant to ease the mood. Elizabeth laughed, a genuine sound that carried some of the weight away with it. Before long, I asked if she'd like to grab coffee sometime. The invitation felt natural, a step toward reconnecting, even if only as friends. Her face lit up with a smile, and she agreed. The rest of the drive passed with a quiet ease, a tentative peace settling between us. For the first time in years, it felt like we had found a way to move forward, not to erase the past, but to find a path through it, together in some small way. After navigating a few quiet turns, we arrived at my house, a modest starter home nestled in a calm neighborhood. Liz and I exchanged license plate information and agreed to meet later in the week. I stepped out of the SUV, retrieved my luggage from the trunk, and waved as she smiled from the driver's seat. But something in her expression lingered, a shadow of hesitation that made me pause just as I closed the door behind me. Dropping my bags in the hallway, I turned back and approached her car. Peering through the driver's side window, I caught her brushing at her hair nervously, her face a mixture of exhaustion and turmoil. I motioned for her to roll down the window, and though she hesitated, she eventually did. Her attempt at a casual demeanor faltered, and cracks began to show in her carefully constructed composure. She insisted she was fine, chalking it up to the long drive and fatigue, but her trembling voice betrayed her. Her words stumbled into self-recrimination as she berated herself for the mess she felt she had made of everything, both then and now. She admitted that the drive had been one of her happiest moments in years, and confessed how painful it was to watch me walk into the house, leaving her alone again. The raw vulnerability in her voice was both startling and heartbreaking. Her thoughts spilled out in a torrent, revealing how much she still cared for me, how much she had missed me, and how deeply she regretted her actions. She stopped abruptly, horrified at her unintended confession, and began apologizing again, as though trying to take back everything she had just said. She started to pull herself together, saying she needed to leave, but her distress was clear. I interrupted her spiraling thoughts, gently urging her to come inside to calm her nerves. I reassured her that there were no expectations, only concern for her well-being. My admission that I had missed her too, that none of the people I dated since her could compare, made her pause. I told her that despite everything that had happened, the fact that she hadn't taken things further with Chad was a turning point for me. It meant there was still a foundation we could build on if we both truly wanted to try. Her hesitation gave way to cautious hope. She agreed, her voice barely above a whisper, and I assured her she was welcome, not in my bed, but under my roof, so I could know she was safe. As I carried her bags inside, something shifted between us, a tentative beginning, fragile but filled with possibility. The night marked the start of a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. We didn't rush. Counseling became a cornerstone, helping us untangle the knots of our past and address the ways we had failed each other. Without the pressure of public scrutiny or the interference of external chaos, we found a way to reconnect. Over time, what had seemed impossible began to feel natural again. Weeks passed, and we grew closer. Eventually, we found our way back to the same bed. Days turned into weeks, and our lives began to overlap once more, this time with a sense of mutual respect and understanding we hadn't achieved before. I shaved my beard, a quiet gesture of shared laughter over her disdain for it, but she kept her black hair, a mark of her evolution into someone new. Occasionally, people still recognized us, but the recognition no longer carried the sting it once had. It became a source of humor rather than harm. Even on our honeymoon, strangers occasionally approached, referencing the old memes with a playful nod. We obliged, posing for photos with a knowing grin, often flipping the script, Liz basking in attention while I scrolled through my phone, or a more confident version of me chatting with a glamorous stranger while Liz feigned disinterest. The internet, for its part, had moved on. Though our pages remained on meme archives, they were relics of a time that no longer defined us. Neither of us missed the social media accounts we had deleted years ago. The lives of Tracy and Bill belonged to a different story, one that couldn't have been salvaged under the weight of its failures. Tracy couldn't truly understand the pain she had caused until she experienced it herself, and Bill couldn't find a way out of his own struggles. Together, they had been unable to withstand the pressures of their broken world, but Liz and Will, they were different. Liz carried hard-earned humility and a newfound empathy, while Will had gained stability and confidence. Together, they built something new. Not a return to the past, but a fresh start with lessons learned and scars acknowledged. This time they were ready to face the world and each other with open hearts. As I hold my baby in my lap with another on the way, growing in my wife's belly, I find myself reflecting on what I've written here. I'm not tempting fate when I say I truly believe we'll make this work. These little lives, thriving because of our love and resilience, are proof of that belief. At the start of this story, I said my life would have been easier if Tracy had died. Perhaps that's true, but I've come to realize that easier and better are not the same thing. Life is rarely simple, and growth often comes with pain. But I can't imagine a better life than the one I have now, and I wouldn't trade the versions of ourselves we've become for anything. Sometimes choosing what's better means enduring challenges, and for me, that's a choice I'll always make.